so much for joining. I'm really excited to present. I think this is a really important topic, especially right now. So my name's Amanda, and I teach anthropology courses at Red Rocks Community College and CCCOnline, both in Colorado. I also am a student in learning, design, and technology at CU Denver. So I wear a lot of hats, but mostly I'm a teacher. And as a student, I have a whole new perspective. As a student, again, I have a whole new perspective on teaching. So not only am I learning new pedagogies, but I'm also really remembering what it's like to be a student. And so I would like to talk about trauma-informed teaching and humanizing the classroom. I feel that by being trauma-informed, it's a natural way to humanizing the classroom. So today I would love for you guys to be as involved as you want to in the chat. I'll have a few questions and a few reflections that I would love for you guys to join in on if you would like. I also want to disclose that we're going to be talking about some possibly hard stuff. So some of you, this might be easy. Some of you, this might be difficult. So I just want to give a heads up that we will be learning about trauma. And at any time, you're welcome to take a break, get up and shake it off. If anything's triggering, take some deep breaths. We will be taking a few breaks as a group to breathe and process some of the information. All right, I always love to start with a quote. There are times when personal experience keeps us from reaching the mountaintop, and so we let it go because the weight of it is too heavy. And of course, Bell Hooks is a wonderful teacher and a teacher of teachers. And I feel that this quote really resonates with me in regards to trauma-informed teaching. A lot of our students and even ourselves will give up if it gets too hard. And I don't want my students to give up. So I'm curious how you guys already are creating a safe, inclusive, equitable, and compassionate classroom or online environment. If you want to share with us in the chat a few words or a sentence on how you're already doing this. Oh, I love that. Asking students to embrace failure. Lenient deadlines, great. Flexibility, right? Failing is part of the learning process. I love that. Making sure our faculty are trained in social justice and equity practices. Perfect. Yes. Flexibility and extensions for mental health. Absolutely. So most of you are already trauma informed. Being available. Absolutely. Trying to create consistency so that students can easily navigate through everything we can make easy. And also consistency creates trust too. That's great. De-emphasizing grading, yay, and focusing on personal achievement of goals. Oh, I love it. Thank you guys. All right, so it sounds like you guys are already doing a lot of really wonderful things, and thank you for sharing. So today, I want you, by the end of this presentation, I would love for you to be able to answer these questions. What is trauma and who experiences it? How does experiencing trauma affect learning? What is trauma-informed teaching and why is it important in higher education? How is teaching trauma similar and different to trauma-informed teaching? And what are some easy ways to implement trauma-informed pedagogy into our classrooms? Okay, so I'm going to just jump right in. Trauma. What is trauma? Can you guys maybe write down in the chat a few words that you think of when you think of trauma? All right. Long lasting, depends on the day, difficulties. Yeah, it depends on the day. Yep. Personal. Fear. Yes. It's going so quickly. I can't read them all. This is great. Great stuff, you guys. So everyone has heard the word trauma, and I'm sure many of you have heard the buzz term trauma-informed teaching, especially now. And so the point of this presentation is really just to give you guys a basis to what trauma-informed is and a few techniques to implement that in your classroom. And many of you maybe already are. So I know a lot of presentations are including the word trauma-informed without really giving a deep background of what trauma is and how it affects the brain and how it affects learning. So that's my purpose today in this, is just to really give you guys a foundation. And what is trauma? All right, so let's make a list. Well, I don't have the fun little online stuff to make a list. So I see it in the chat, and that's going to be our list. And let's compare our answers. So here is a quote that I got from one of my sources. Traumatic life experiences include physical or sexual abuse, abandonment, neglect, or betrayal of trust, such as abuse from a primary caregiver. There we go. Death or loss of a loved one, caregiver having a life-threatening illness, domestic violence, poverty and chronically chaotic housing and financial resources, automobile accident and other serious accident, bullying, life-threatening health situations and painful medical procedures, witnessing or experiencing community violence, including shootings, stabbings, or robberies, witnessing police activity or having a family member incarcerated, life-threatening natural disasters, acts or threats of terrorism viewed in person or on television, military combat. Most people think trauma is military, but you can see there's so many other things, and then historical trauma, which we're experiencing now with the pandemic. So this is a huge list, right? And it's not just some of the traditional stereotypical trauma, like I said, military combat that we think, or even domestic violence, right? A car accident, bullying, you know, all of these things that might be what my therapist calls little t can actually cause some serious big T, big trauma responses in the body. Okay, so that was a pretty intense list. I know it's pretty intense for me to see that list of all the things us humans can go through that can cause trauma. So we're going to just take a few moments to breathe and reflect. Just take a few breaths and moments. And I do this in my classes sometimes as well. And right, we call this mindfulness, which is a very trauma-informed practice as well. All right. So who experiences trauma and traumatic stress? Anyone answer that for me in the chat? Oh, ACEs, yes, absolutely. I see someone brought up ACEs in the chat. That's a whole nother conversation, but absolutely, that's what brought me to this research, is looking at ACEs. Everyone, yes, you guys already know, anyone can. I think a lot of people have misconception on who experiences trauma. You know, for me, I just thought it was military or domestic violence. So if you haven't experienced those kinds of big T trauma, why would you have any kind of stress around that? And that was something that was a misconception that I have, and that maybe you wouldn't have PTSD if you weren't in the military, right? And I have PTSD, and I was not in the military. And when I got that diagnosis, I didn't feel worthy or deserving of that. And so it just really drew me to this research, and it made me realize how many people can experience trauma in a stressful manner that affects every aspect of their life. And so, yeah, it seems like you guys all are really well versed already, and that is very exciting. But many people don't know that anyone can experience trauma, and it can be something that might not seem traumatic, like a car accident, right? Which of course a car accident is traumatic, but does it cause PTSD, right? And that's something that I think a lot of people have misconceptions about. All right, and this is another thing that is really hard for me to see as well. How many people experience trauma? We know anyone can experience trauma. We know how many events can cause trauma, but let's look at the statistics. 66 to 85% of college students reported experiencing at least one traumatic event in their lifetimes. 21% of college students reported that the traumatic event occurred whilst in college. 9 to 12% of adults have PTSD. All right, so I don't know if that was new information for you guys, but it always, even though it's not new for me, it always is shocking to see the numbers. So if you have a, excuse me, if you have a class of 20 students, you have 4 of them, that 2 to 4 of them have, let me look back at the numbers here. I'll think of math. So let's do 10. I'm bad at math. That's why I'm an anthropologist, right? So if you have 85% of your students and you have a class of 10, that's 8.5 students, up to 8.5 students, right? And of course, this is all stuff before the pandemic. I did all this research, prior to the newest data coming out. So let's not forget that this is before the pandemic. And so how many students are experiencing trauma right now and in the past year? I'm assuming that the numbers will increase, but this is pretty, this is huge. It's a lot of students. All right, so I need a minute to breathe and reflect and just kind of do a body scan, how you guys are feeling. You guys can get up and shake it out. That really helps with stress. Tapping is also a great way to work through some of the stress. Okay. All right, I have a few videos to help me out here on teaching you guys about what PTSD is. So I'm going to go ahead and start this.
Many of us will experience some kind of trauma during our lifetime. Sometimes we escape with no long-term effects, but for millions of us, those experiences linger.
This phenomenon called post-traumatic
Stress disorder, or PTSD, isn't a personal failing. Rather, it's a treatable malfunction of certain biological mechanisms that allow us to cope with dangerous experiences. To understand PTSD, we first need to understand how the brain processes a wide range of ordeals, including the death of a loved one, domestic violence, injury or illness, abuse, rape, war, car accidents, and natural disasters. These events can bring on feelings of danger and helplessness, which activate the brain's alarm system, known as the fight, flight, freeze response. When this alarm sounds, the hypothalamic, pituitary, and adrenal systems, known as the HPA axis, work together to send signals to the autonomic nervous system. That's the network that communicates with adrenal glands and internal organs to help regulate functions like heart rate, digestion, and respiration. These signals start a chemical cascade that floods the body with several different stress hormones, causing physiological changes that prepare the body to defend itself. Our heart rate speeds up, breathing quickens, and muscles tense. Even after a crisis is over, escalated levels of stress hormones may last for days, contributing to jittery feelings, nightmares, and other symptoms. For most people, these experiences disappear within a few days to 2 weeks as their hormone levels stabilize. But a small percentage of those who experience trauma have persistent problems, sometimes vanishing temporarily, only to resurface months later. We don't completely understand what's happening in the brain, but one theory is that the stress hormone cortisol may be continuously activating the fight, flight, freeze response while reducing overall brain functioning, leading to a number of negative symptoms. These symptoms often fall into 4 categories: intrusive thoughts, like dreams and flashbacks, avoiding reminders of the trauma, negative thoughts and feelings like fear, anger, and guilt, and reactive symptoms like irritability and difficulty sleeping. Not everyone has all these symptoms or experiences them to the same extent and intensity. When problems last more than a month, PTSD is often diagnosed. Genetics, ongoing overwhelming stress, and many risk factors like pre-existing mental illnesses or lack of emotional support likely play a role in determining who will experience PTSD. But the underlying cause is still a medical mystery. A major challenge of coping with PTSD is sensitivity to triggers, physical and emotional stimuli that the brain associates with the original trauma. These can be everyday sensations that aren't inherently dangerous, but prompt powerful physical and emotional reactions. For example, the smell of a campfire could evoke the memory of being trapped in a burning house. For someone with PTSD, that memory activates the same neurochemical cascade as the original event. That then stirs up the same feelings of panic and helplessness, as if they're experiencing the trauma all over again. Trying to avoid these triggers, which are sometimes unpredictable, can lead to isolation. That can leave people feeling invalidated, ignored, or misunderstood, like a pause button has been pushed on their lives while the rest of the world continues around them. But there are options. If you think you might be suffering from PTSD, the first step is an evaluation with a mental health professional who can direct you towards the many resources available. Psychotherapy can be very effective for PTSD, helping patients better understand their triggers. And certain medications can make symptoms more manageable, as can self-care practices like mindfulness and regular exercise. What if you notice signs of PTSD in a friend or family member? Social support, acceptance, and empathy are key to helping and recovery. Let them know you believe their account of what they're experiencing and that you don't blame them for their reactions. If they're open to it, encourage them to seek evaluation and treatment. PTSD has been called the hidden wound because it comes without outward physical signs. But even if it is an invisible disorder, it doesn't have to be a silent one. Mental health conditions impact millions of people around the world, yet are often misunderstood. Check out this playlist to get informed.
All right. Let's see if I can continue. Okay, so let's take a few moments and reflect on this information. I really appreciate videos and TED Talks to help teach content, and I know students appreciate that as well. So I hope you guys appreciated the video despite maybe some audio issues. I apologize. All right, did anything surprise you? Have you learned this before? I know every time I watch it, it's always a surprise about how anything can trigger someone's emotional response back into the time that the trauma occurred. So that always surprises me. Does anyone want to share something that they learned or that surprised them? Right, the senses triggering the response was a reminder for me. Yep, me too, every time. Thank you, Tabitha. Right, it's interesting to see the video, even though it might not be new. Yeah, thank you. Seem to have ties to panic disorder, right? Yes, panic disorder is a symptom of PTSD, if I'm not mistaken. How chemical it is in the brain, yes. Yeah, we'll learn a little bit more about the brain in a minute. Great, thank you guys. Okay, so from this information, do you think PTSD affects learning? I'm assuming you guys are seeing the connection here of what I'm getting to next. Absolutely, yes. All right. So how does the body respond to trauma? So trauma affects the parts of the brain that deals with learning and memory, such as the frontal lobe and the hippocampus. And people with PTSD live in a constant state of fight or flight called hypervigilance. So we can say they live in a constant state of fear. So people with PTSD always are looking for the bear. So they're always anticipating a threat. So looking at exits every time they enter a room, just always thinking of ways to escape a situation when they're not feeling safe. And even those without PTSD or post-traumatic stress symptoms, PTSS, who experience high levels of chronic stress may also be living in that state of hypervigilance or fear. So you can imagine how this can affect learning when someone is constantly focused on how to escape a situation. How can they be present in the moment to learn and to engage in a learning community? All right, so how do physical responses to stress and trauma relate to learning? So I have another video. Hopefully it's a little better. And Adam, if you could add the link to the chat, that would be really great. Thanks.
Hey, welcome back. Today, I really wanted to think about what's the best way to teach teachers about trauma without getting them distracted with all the technical stuff, and what's the most important thing for them to understand and learn. And I thought that the best way to do it might be to just make a difference between a learning brain versus a brain in survival mode. And so we'll just call it learning brain versus survival brain. And this is the difference. So brain is this brain that learning new information. And it's complicated and unique and brave and ambiguous. And it sees the big picture. It like pulls back and is on the balcony, can look over the forest and figure out what's going on. On an emotional level, people in learning brain feel calm, peaceful, maybe a little excited about what they're about to learn, maybe a little playful and having fun too, and definitely curious. And they're not afraid of making mistakes because it's just part of the learning process. And so they're not really thinking about themselves. And they actually feel a little bit of confidence that if they just apply themselves, they might pick up what they're trying to learn. Now, survival brain, on the other hand, is completely different. It's hyper-focused on threat. It doesn't like ambiguity. It wants clear, hard facts. It thinks in black and white terms. It doesn't want anything to be gray at all. And then emotionally, you can imagine that survival brain makes people feel panicky, feel like a little obsessive and afraid of getting things wrong. And they don't feel calm and open to learning new things. They just want to get things over with. And people in survival brain also really don't like making mistakes, and they are afraid of looking stupid too. So students in survival brain don't want to be picked on. They don't want to raise their hand and ask questions and look stupid. And so these people are also filled with doubt about their own ability to learn stuff, and they're afraid that other people can see how stupid they really are. Now, it's really important to understand how learning brain and survival brain interact, because survival brain always trumps learning brain. And it makes sense because survival brain is just trying to save your life. And so if it thinks that there's something dangerous happening, you better pay attention to it, right? But the tricky thing is that as survival brain stays on longer and longer, it's harder to get out of that. And it's harder to really go into learning brain. And the way I think about it is kind of like the myth of Sisyphus. You know that guy who has to push a rock up a hill, and then every day it falls back down and he has to do it over and over again? Well, being in learning brain is like being up on the high parts of that mountain. You can see the expanse of what's going on, but it also takes a lot of work to be up there. And at any second, if you're not paying attention and putting effort into it, it's so easy to slip back into survival brain again. And that rock that Sisyphus is trying to push up, well, that's kind of like stress. And the more stressed you feel, the heavier and bigger that rock gets, and it just pushes you back into survival brain quicker. Now, the kicker is that for traumatized people, stress is a really rigid and intense thing. And so with trauma, any little stress makes that rock grow way bigger than it normally would. And because people with trauma misperceive ambiguous situations as threatening and stressful, that rock just stays big all the time. Now, the good news is that the more you control stress, well, the easier it is to be in learning brain, right? Because that rock is a lot smaller. And what I really want to highlight for teachers is that the best way to keep students in learning brain goes back to why I spent so much time talking about attachment. Students best learn when they feel like they're safe and supported by the adults around them. So it's kind of like a baby elephant. You know how like on those nature shows, the baby elephant is like playing with leaves or exploring a tree or something like that and having a lot of fun. And the only reason why they can do that is because there's a whole group of mama elephants around that baby protecting it and looking out for danger. So a kid with trauma or who's stuck in survival brain, it's kind of like that baby elephant who doesn't have protective adults around them. They can't play and learn because they're way too focused looking out for threat and danger. So this is why I really believe that the most important thing that schools need to focus on, way more important than any kind of techniques or curricula, is really whether or not they are creating that environment where students feel like they're surrounded by these big mama elephants who are going to protect them and watch out for them and make them safe. And when students have that, I bet you it unlocks their curiosity, their eagerness to learn, and play as a way to learn. So I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thanks.
All right, great. I'm glad you guys like that. I see a few people chatting. Okay, sorry.
Hey, welcome back.
Get this going. Okay, so I would love for you guys to kind of just reflect a little bit on that. It's a lot to think about, you know, what our students are going through and how we as educators can help them through some of these very stressful times so they can learn and be successful and following their dreams of getting a degree. So why does this matter? Okay, so how do you think your students' learning is affected by traumatic stress? I think the videos really answered this question, but I'd love to know as educators, how you guys personally think after learning this information. How do you think your students' learning is affected by traumatic stress? So I'd love to open the conversation up to the chat to see if you guys have any comments. Who becomes the mama elephant for educators? The entire college, everyone involved. I think it's a great question. I think all staff at colleges and universities need to take training like this, just to support the students at every level and every step of the way in their journey. Yeah, they're unable to meet tasks and deadlines. They're less willing to explore. They're less willing to take risks. Yes. Trauma can lessen synthesis. Great. They're just checking the boxes, but they're not absorbing the information, right? They're kind of just going through the motions. They're more often to drop out of school, right? Cameras are always off on Zoom, but that's also trauma informed, giving them the option to be off, because some people just don't want to be on camera, especially if they're housing insecure or there's 7 family members running around and pets, right? So letting them choose to have their video off is really important. Great. Have to face these questions with every encounter. Yeah, we just don't know what our students are going through. But this is a good chance that they're going through some kind of event that's stressful, right? Because of those statistics. And then of course, the pandemic has really increased that. All right, thank you for sharing. So this is what we see in college students and post-secondary learners. Difficulty focusing, attending, retaining, and recalling. tendency to miss a lot of classes, challenges with emotional regulation. I'm sure some of you have had students and you don't know why. They just suddenly have an emotional outburst. This might be why. Fear of taking risks, anxiety about deadlines, exams, group work, or public speaking, anger, helplessness, or disassociation when stressed, withdrawal and isolation, involvement in unhealthy relationships. So I think you guys are all kind of making these connections, and you're saying all this in the chat. All right, so what is trauma-informed teaching? So we know what trauma is, we know who can experience trauma and what it does to the brain and how it can affect learning. So what can we do as educators to help our students be able to learn and be successful in college? So trauma-informed teaching is a set of principles that focus on respecting survivors of trauma. And I think that just simply being aware of how many people of all backgrounds and demographic groups experience trauma can help an educator become more compassionate towards all students. Being trauma-informed and using trauma-informed pedagogy helps to humanize your classroom. All right, so with that said, very simple, trauma-informed teaching to me is just knowing what our students are experiencing and being aware and compassionate about that. So what are some things you're thinking about right now that you can implement into your classroom to be more trauma-informed? Does anyone have ideas? Providing extra time for students, right? I think in general, providing extra time for students in general, not just the ones you know are experiencing trauma, but especially those who are experiencing trauma, absolutely. Any other ideas? Sometimes that's hard to give extra time, right? So is there anything you guys can think of you can do that doesn't take more time out of your own lives? Journaling, right? If they're willing, I love that. Give them choices. Staying consistent, absolutely staying consistent. Universal design, great. Without the students needing to self-identify, you're on it, exactly. Having this be universal design so students don't have to disclose their experiences. Yes, that is kind of my conclusion. So you're jumping the gun there, but that's wonderful. I'm glad you're seeing that. Asynchronous and synchronous meetings, both, that's a great idea. Providing self-care resources, absolutely. Great ideas, you guys. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so here's some general principles of trauma-informed teaching. Include options in your assignments, especially those where students have to talk about themselves. A lot of activities in our classes include talking about themselves. And my advice is to always give options. I think they're wonderful assignments, and I think there's so much to gain, especially building community by allowing students to talk about themselves. But there will be, 20% of your class that will be checked out if you only have the option of talking about themselves. So I really want to stress how important it is that we give our students options. So like icebreaker activities on the first day, you can tell me where you're from, why you're here, or your favorite food, right? So those students who don't want to talk about themselves can say their favorite food. It makes me really hungry and it's hard, but I have to give some kind of options for students so they feel safe and can engage. All right, provide support and show empathy, create safe spaces, create trust, have a late policy. I think that has come up a lot today already, having late policies. I think more and more instructors are willing to do that. And it's just an inclusive social justice thing as well, having a late policy. Use not yet language when giving feedback. So a lot of students are afraid of taking risks because they're afraid of doing something wrong. So if you say, oh, well, you're not quite there yet, please work on this, that is really helpful for students to stay focused in the moment and not jump back into trauma brain and live in the past when the trauma happened. For example, I have a lot of students who need help with citations. And if I just say, 50% you get an F because you didn't use in-text citations and that's plagiarism, they're going to freak out and they're going to probably run away and never come back. But if I say to them, oh, this is great work, you just need to add in-text citations and here's why, and here's a link to Purdue OWL, please try again and resubmit this assignment. It's more work for me, but then the students learn, they feel safe. They feel safe that they're not going to get in trouble for doing something wrong. But more importantly, they see that I'm a safe person to take risks with. Focus on competency versus completion. So my example before, I want them to leave my class not plagiarizing, right? So if they learn in-text citations with me, that's a competency versus completion. So if I say, hey, this isn't right because you plagiarized, that's going to freak them out. And that's, okay, you completed the assignment, but you didn't complete the competency. So I'm going to give you another chance so you can fulfill the competency versus, hey, you turned it in and this is just the grade you get. It's this, it all fits together with the not yet language, feeling safe, the late policy, all of this kind of fits together. Reflective assignments have been an amazing way for me to check in with my students, for students to reflect on their own learning, for them to reach out for help. Sometimes the reflective assignments I give are turned in by students I haven't seen in my course for 2 weeks, and they suddenly show up and they're telling me all of these things that they need or they're struggling with, like they don't have internet and they don't have a house, or all of these things can come up in a reflective assignment. Sometimes they don't, right? They have the option. They have the option to say, I'm doing great. I think I deserve an A because I'm really active in class. I really loved learning about blank. I need more help with blank. Or they can tell me, any kind of personal issues. I leave it all to them, and I never ever ask them questions in the reflective assignments. Anything more personal than, do you need help from me? How are you doing in the class? What have you learned so far? What has been your favorite topic? Really general questions, really open-ended questions, but reflective learning is a very effective way, especially with adults, to really, like I've been doing today, kind of have us reflect on some things that we learned about. And it also helps get certain information to the parts of the brain that keeps it in the memory, if that makes sense. All right. I used to teach ESL students and particularly refugee students. And so this was 20 years ago that I learned about this technique for students who experience trauma. Having something in their hands helps them focus and stay in the moment versus going down the rabbit hole of their thoughts and going back into that moment of trauma or being triggered back into the past. So coloring sheets, pipe cleaners, fidget spinners, having this available for students. Of course, this is in person. And I know many of you teachers have seen your students doodle during lectures instead of taking notes. And honestly, that's actually a really effective way for people to retain information, is doodling during lectures. So while we might say, oh, you need to take notes and not doodle, allowing students to color and fidget with things, as long as it's not distracting, can actually help them focus and learn. Okay, so the main goal, as I see it, with trauma-informed teaching, is to lessen anxiety for all students in order to increase success. So some of the major sources of anxiety, tests, right? Always. I know a lot of colleges have classes on lowering test anxiety. So what if you take out tests? I know I have. I've taken out tests, and I do writing assignments and other things to check and see how students are doing with their learning and to show me that they've fulfilled the competencies. Due dates, that goes right back to having a late policy. Having a late policy will take out some anxiety. Assignments, you know, we can't necessarily take out assignments, right? But we can do things in our courses that lessen the anxiety. Again, having a late policy, creating trust, creating a safe space for students to take risks in those assignments. Group work. I don't like group work only because sometimes everyone involved, they're not equally doing the work, and it's really frustrating for students. But maybe you guys can think of some ideas on how you can lessen anxiety with group work. Discussions. Again, I think the late policy and creating safe spaces will allow students to feel more willing to engage in discussions. And again, talking about themselves, I'm just really trying to hone in that point that having assignments where students have to talk about themselves is not trauma informed. And having options is a great way to get more students involved and not feeling like they have to talk about themselves to bring up that trauma. All right, public speaking. You can have options, they can record themselves, right? These are all the main sources of anxiety, and that green list are ways to help lessen the anxiety that is trauma informed. All right, so what trauma-informed teaching is not? I think this is really important to cover because a lot of people will say to me, oh, well, I can't cater to just a couple students. Well, you're not lowering your standards. It's not asking instructors to diagnose trauma. It does not cater to a small number of students. As someone mentioned earlier, designing your courses with these principles in mind, having it be like that universal design is a good idea. Applying trauma-informed teaching principles leads to greater success for all students, not just those who have experienced trauma. The goal of creating safe learning spaces and lowering anxieties in the classroom is beneficial for all students. And it does not protect students from learning about trauma. As an anthropologist, that's just part of the curriculum, right? When in regards to humans, when we're learning about humans, some pretty terrible things has to come up and be taught and talked about, right? So we're not protecting students. We're not catering to a small number of students. We're not diagnosing trauma. And we're not lowering our standards by being trauma informed. All right, so here's a few other teaching pedagogies that are aligned. I'm not going to go into these, but I am going to plug ungrading. I know there's a presentation about that, I think tomorrow, and I'm really a big proponent for that, and it's very trauma-informed. Culturally proficient pedagogy, social and emotional learning, critical pedagogy, critical digital pedagogy, all of these are aligned with trauma-informed teaching. So many of you might already be doing this in your classrooms. Okay, so teaching trauma. Teaching trauma is not the same as trauma-informed teaching. Teaching trauma is including traumatic content as part of the course curriculum and is often unavoidable. Vicarious trauma affects teachers and students. So secondary exposure to trauma is vicarious trauma. So watching TV or films of a traumatic event, teaching, learning about traumatic events, reading assignments where students discuss their experienced traumatic events. This is all vicarious trauma. And don't forget to take care of yourselves. Sometimes you might be triggered, and if it's too much, maybe change the assignment. It is important that you as teachers and educators feel safe as well, and to give yourself space to process and to just, go through all of these emotions that could be traumatizing, or you could have had some trauma, vicarious trauma with some students' experiences. So make sure you're taking care of yourself. It's also about you as well. It's not just about the students. Okay, traumatic course content should be presented in a responsible way in order to reduce vicarious trauma. So I always give kind of a heads up, or I don't know if trigger warning is the proper word anymore, so I try and use heads up. There's been some studies that trigger warning itself can turn students away from doing an activity. So just giving students a heads up, like, hey, this might be traumatizing. You're welcome to leave the room at any time, stop the video. And then reflective activities is a great way to process through the students' emotions and even your own emotions and be vulnerable, right? We all are human. And just because you're the teacher doesn't mean that you are special. Well, you are special, but you're not immune to trauma yourself. So speak as a class, you know, get on the same level and reflect as a group and have that community and culture and safe space. Okay, so always be knowledgeable of mental health services offered by college and local organizations. And I think you guys already know this and how important it is when students disclose trauma and traumatic events that you have the information for them, that the college or university or community, the services that they have offered for students. Okay, so just to sum it up, trauma changes the brain and affects learning. Up to 80% of people have experienced at least one traumatic event by the time they reach college. Not all people who experience trauma have PTSD. People who have PTSD have difficulties feeling safe. Trauma-informed teaching instruction increases student success by creating a safe space and a safe learning environment. A focus on reducing anxiety will help support the learning environment for all students and not just those who have experienced or are experiencing trauma. Trauma-informed teaching and teaching trauma are two different things, but they both need to be addressed when implementing a trauma-informed teaching pedagogy. And being trauma-informed and having trauma-informed teaching strategies will allow for a more equitable, humanistic, and inclusive education experience for our students. And just a reminder, students are resilient and can succeed despite hardships. Trauma-informed pedagogy is a simple shift that can lead to increased success for all learners. So I have a few minutes for questions. I also wanted to do a reflection, but I don't think we'll get to that. So I really recommend everyone to jot down some reflection, some notes on your thoughts and feelings about this on your own after, maybe at the end of the day, or at least after this presentation when you have that 10 minutes, just to allow yourself to process some of this information. So I want to open it up to any questions. I'm just now getting to the chat. So if you guys want to unmute yourself, if you have a question, we have about 2 minutes. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for coming. I'm sorry I didn't get to pay attention to the chat very much. Great, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you guys. I was a little nervous, not gonna lie. It's been a while since I've been in front of this many people, so I appreciate your kind and thoughtful words. I hope you learned some great things. All right, thank you guys. So I don't see any questions, so I hope I was clear and concise, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your time with this conference, and maybe I'll see some of you in other presentations. Thank you guys. Consider doing a longer workshop. Yes, that's a good idea. Thanks for that. Yes, I think we're good. Thank you, Adam. Thanks, everyone.